Welcome back to another edition of the Night Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie Schneiderite. Special guest today, David Cunningham of Tech Sidelines podcast. He's going to go through everything Virginia Tech related leading up to this game. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on.
So this offseason, it was a big year. Brent Pry year two. What are the general vibes around Tech regarding Brent Pry and his going into his second year? Or I guess early in his second year as coach of Virginia Tech.
Well, I think the offseason was a big success. Brent Pry, when he took over at the end of 2021, early 2022, there wasn't much talent within the program. And one of the things he has done over the last 2 years is he's really brought in a lot of new talent. Ollie Jennings, I think, he will not play this weekend, but he's a great example of a guy who Brent Pry brought in to kind of turn this team around. Tech brought in 3 transfer wide receivers, a transfer defensive back, a transfer defensive end, a transfer offensive lineman, a bunch of players across the board, and Tech's recruiting much, much better. So the vibes in the offseason were much higher. The problem is you get to September and you have to win on the field. And through 2 games, Tech beat Old Dominion in the season opener. It was an okay showing. Then obviously Purdue, a 5.5-hour delay. Tech only lost by a touchdown, and it very, very close game. But I think the offensive struggles, they haven't gone away from last year. This is an offense that was abysmal, one of the worst ever in college football last year, and Tech still is not able to run the ball. The passing game, when the weapons are healthy, had been good. But the question is, are the weapons going to be healthy going forward? And as I'm sure we'll talk about, Tech only ran the ball for 11 yards last week, which makes me think back to that 2012 Russell Athletic Bowl with Rutgers, where Tech ran the ball for just 3 yards, which I'm sure is a football game absolutely nobody wants to talk about because it was so ugly.
I think Gary Nova threw 5 interceptions in that game, if I'm remembering correctly. Or maybe that was the Penn State game, but yeah, it was. I think we were winning 10-0 going into the fourth quarter, and we lost 13-10 in overtime, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, 13-10. Yeah.
Ugly Talk game. A little bit about last week's game. Obviously, a lot of us in the Northeast dealt with weather issues this past weekend, but I don't think anybody quite dealt with it as bad as weather issues as they did in Blacksburg. It was a 12 o'clock game. There was the longest delay in college football history, I think, in terms of the time. It was almost 6 hours of a delay. Just talk through what it was like at last week's game, how surreal it must have been, because you guys also got a lot of injuries in that game. Just kind of talk through how last Saturday went.
Yeah, very interesting. First time I've ever had a noon game end at like 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, it just seemed like a very weird weather weekend for all of college football. There were 5 or 6 different games in the ACC that got delayed, from Notre Dame, NC State to Virginia, James Madison, Boston College. I know hosted Holy Cross, I believe, and that game got delayed. The Tennessee's game got delayed. I mean, it was just delays all across college football. I know UMass and Miami of Ohio had 2 separate delays that added up to about 5.5 hours. So just a lot. Virginia Tech had a 22-minute delay before the start of the game. The kickoff time was pushed back 22 minutes. So that already kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in it. But Tech, he played the first 9-10 minutes, and then from there, more lightning in the area, kind of torrential downpour just in the middle of thunderstorms for about 4 or 5 hours. Finally went back, kicked off at about 6:15. And it was really interesting to get to talk to the players after the game and just get their perspective on what they did for so long. And they kind of said the most difficult part was to be mentally ready the entire time, because you don't know. For so long, they didn't know. It wasn't until 4:30 when they were informed that they were going to kick off at 6:15 again. So there was a 2 to 3 hour window before that where they didn't know if they were even going to go back to playing again. So it was a very unique game, I think, for both Virginia Tech and Purdue. And just, you don't know if you're going to play and what's the field going to look like. The grounds crew did a fantastic job with managing the field. There were almost 4.5 inches of rain on the field, and they were able to go back and play, which just kind of tells you how good of a job they did. But just a very strange Saturday. And then Virginia Tech gets a couple guys picked up injuries. Ollie Jennings, the wide receiver, on the second play of the game, he rolled his ankle. He got hit by his teammate Jalen Lane, who kind of fell on his ankle, and he's probably going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks. So that was one of the injuries. A handful of other guys, Jalen Lane, Daquan Wright. I wrote these down because there are so many of them. Keontae Jenkins at linebacker, Keyshawn Burgos at defensive end, Cole Beck, a special teams guy. There were like 6 or 7 guys that got banged up on Saturday. So tough position for Tech. Again, I think it's a positive that it was only a 7-point game, but the problem was that second half there was really nothing going for either Virginia Tech or Purdue, and Purdue kind of just had one really good drive that kind of put the game away.
So kind of a loaded question here. Grant Wells, is he going to be healthy? And then if he's not healthy, can Drones be that guy? I know he only had eight pass attempts last year or last week.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure. I have heard that Wells and he could not put pressure on his foot on his ankle. I think foot ankle during the game, which is why Kyron Drones came in on that final series of the game, which was just another kind of just another piece to that puzzle on Saturday, where this backup quarterback who Brent Pry said he wants to use a 2-quarterback system, hadn't used the other guy all day, and then because the starter is hurt, he puts the other guy in on the final drive of the game and essentially says, "Try to go win us the game." Bad position to put your bad position to put your quarterback in. I like Drones. I think he's a big guy. I mean, he's like 6'3", 215, I think, around there. He's a guy who can run. He's not as good of a thrower as Wells, because if he was as good of a passer, he'd have the starting job. I'm not sure if Wells is going to be able to go. I think that's something, again, I get to watch practice later today. I'll find out more about that. And that's kind of a situation, everybody down in Blacksburg is monitoring. But if Wells is like the end of the game where he could not put any weight essentially on his foot or ankle, that's not a good sign. I think Tech can be okay with Drones. And I think if Wells can't go, it might sort of be a best case scenario for Tech, because Tech needs to be able to run the ball. And I think Drones provides the best opportunity in the run game. Not that Wells is not a good runner, but Drones is more comfortable running the read option, running RPO, stuff like that, which is kind of what a lot of Tech's offense is. He's not as great of a passer. I think the biggest thing comes down to, can Tyler Bowen, the offensive coordinator, kind of scheme stuff up for him? Give him some easy throws where he's not trying to, as he did on the final offensive play of the game for Tech, throw a 40-yard go route. Give him some easy throws, let him settle into the game a little bit. That's kind of the number one question right now. Who's going to be at quarterback for Virginia Tech? I would expect Kyron Drones, unless I see something else from Grant Wells indicating that he's completely healthy. And even if he is able to go but not 100% healthy, I would roll with Drones simply because I think he provides a better option in the run game. And after rushing for 11 yards, which, again, Tech was, before Kyron Drones had a 13-yard scramble on that final drive of the game, Tech had -2 or -3 rushing yards. So just kind of goes to show you how poor how poor that rushing game is right now.
I know you said Drones, if he was a better passer, he'd be the starting quarterback, but was the quarterback competition in camp closer or even close at all? Or
it was. They said it was close. I don't think it was I think it was like close for like a couple of weeks, and then it was kind of Wells kind of separated himself. I think the thing with Drones is he has a little hitch in his throw, and when you watch it, you might be able to see it. He came from Baylor in the offseason. He probably should have redshirted at Baylor, but the problem is that Baylor was not good, that they needed Drones to play some. So he never had that chance to redshirt and really, I guess, fix that motion. I think it was more of a competition where Tech made it more of a competition than it really was, because I think Wells is not as athletic as Drones is, and I think Drones is kind of Tech's quarterback of the future, if you will. That's who they think should be their quarterback of the future, and I think they were trying to give him every opportunity, every chance to win that job. Mm-hmm. Wells won it because I think Wells, his experience, this is his fourth season as a starting quarterback. He's much farther ahead in that aspect, and the biggest upgrade this season, across the board offensively, was wide receivers. Virginia Tech has much more depth at wide receiver now. Even if Ollie Jennings and Jalen Lane can't go, the Hokies are pretty deep at wide receiver still, which is a stark comparison to last season when Virginia Tech essentially only had one wide receiver and somehow survived no injuries. If those injuries, if that group had injuries, that would have been a even tougher offensive season. But no, I think, to your question, I think it's tough. I think Wells is probably the better quarterback if Tech can if Tech can run the ball on the ground, because then Tech can stretch the defense through the air. But the problem is that Tech has been so one-dimensional that he has not been able to throw the ball as well, because defenses essentially are just rushing 3 or rushing 4, if that, and dropping everybody back into coverage and making it really, really difficult to pass the ball.
So, Mike, stop me if you've heard this before. Hitch in his throw, transfer quarterback, 6'3", 6'2", 230, negative rushing yards in a game, maybe under 20 rushing yards in another game. I feel like we've heard this situation before.
This does sound eerily familiar. You want to just let him in on who we're talking about here?
Oh, it's Johnny Lankin.
Yeah.
Rutgers starting tight end now.
Yeah. We had a guy transferring from Boston College, went to one of the prestigious North Jersey parochial schools. He went to Boston College to be a quarterback. He was told basically he's not going to play quarterback. And he came here. He played quarterback for us in 2019 when Chris Ash got fired, and we went like 1-11, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, now he's our tight end.
Hate to bring it up. It should be like sacrilegious to do that. But
but you kind of talked about your rushing game struggling. Is that, do you think, scheme related? Is there a way you think that's easily fixable, or do you think the offensive line is just not where it needs to be? What's your take on the rushing game of Virginia Tech right now?
The offensive line is bad. We're talking like really bad offensive line. I'm sure you guys have experienced really bad offensive lines before.
Yes.
This offensive line, I'm not really sure, honestly, what's going on. Joe Rudolph, who is now at Notre Dame as Notre Dame's offensive line coach, he was Tech's offensive line coach last season, and the offensive line was dreadful. And there was a little bit more experience there than there is this year. This year, Tech had one guy returning as a starter in his exact same spot, and it's right tackle Parker Clements. At center, Caden Moore, he slid over from guard. Besides that, all 3 other guys, so left tackle, left guard, and right guard, they're all guys who had never started a game before up until the season opener against Old Dominion. It's a very young offensive line that has held up very well in pass protection. I will say that. They've been good in pass protection, which is why Grant Wells, when the wide receiver options were healthy, and when Grant Wells has time, this is a pretty fine offense. But I will say, like, if you give any quarterback time in college football that has a decent arm, they're probably pretty fine. So that's how Tech operated pretty well against Old Dominion, but a lot of it was ODU does not have the biggest defensive line. It's a Obviously, a little bit less talented group than a Purdue or a Rutgers. And Wells just had a little bit of time and was able to kind of hit his targets here or there. Purdue last week, big offense or big defensive line. Obviously, I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with them. And Tech just couldn't really do anything on the ground, which led to it being a very one-dimensional game. And by the time Wells, got to throwing the ball, Purdue knew exactly what Tech was going to do in the passing game. And so the biggest challenge for Tech this week is going to be able to establish the run, at least marginally, so Rutgers has to defend it, because so far Old Dominion didn't really have to defend it, and now Old Dominion's secondary just isn't very good. I'm sure this is a problem where Tech's offensive line just isn't very good. It's a second year. Tech hired a new offensive line coach in the offseason, but was kind of hampered by the previous offensive line coach not recruiting the transfer portal at all. There's not much talent in that room. It's a I want to say poor group. They just kind of look lost at times. Whether that's Tyler Bowen and the offensive coordinator and his scheme, I'm not really sure. But this is an offensive line coach who has kind of put together, kind of poor offensive lines before and brought guys together and made it look good. So I think there are a lot of systematic problems within this offense. The good news is that they've been okay in pass blocking.
Yeah, so I'm looking at like the FBS stats. I think Purdue is 11th in the nation in rushing defense. Rutgers currently is at 3rd. So yeah. I do think it's not a great opportunity for you guys to try and get your run game situated, because Rutgers, while they've had a pretty good defense this year, they've been elite in the run defense. In terms of your pass catchers, you mentioned Ali Jennings, obviously a transfer portal guy from Old Dominion, who got injured. You saw Jalen Lane, who was spectacular for you guys, but he also went away with injuries. Who are some of the other top guys that Rutgers fans should be looking out for? I saw Daquan Wright is graded very highly and has put up good stats as a tight end. And you mentioned a few other guys. Who should we be on the lookout for? Who's likely to play on Saturday?
Yeah, well, I would expect, until heard otherwise, I would expect Jalen Lane to play. Okay. I think he just had a little bit of a hamstring thing in the game. I have not heard otherwise. He is, even with Ollie Jennings on the field, I think Jalen Lane is Tech's most dynamic receiver. He's a little shifty guy. He plays in the slot, but he can catch and go. He only played a half, and he had 5 catches for 54 yards and a touchdown against Purdue. He had a couple of really big plays in the opener against Old Dominion. I really like Jalen Lane. He's very dynamic. Tech has this guy, Daquan Felton. He's 6'5".
Is he from Norfolk State transfer?
Yes. He's a very big target. Tech has not used him a ton this year, but he does start usually. He did not have a catch against Purdue. He had one, I believe, for 34 yards down the sideline. It's kind of a go route against Old Dominion. He can be a weapon, and I'm interested to see what happens if Jennings obviously is unavailable, where Tech goes. I think Felton is a big option. Stephen Gosnell, he's I guess you would say he's the one white receiver Tech has. He's a very sure guy. He's pretty consistent. His brother Benji is a tight end, and he's a redshirt freshman. He's done very well at tight end right now. Daquan Wright's another good option there at tight end. Tech has some pretty good receiving options, which is, again, a stark comparison to last year, where Tech essentially had 1 or 2 tight ends and 1 consistent wide receiver. This year, there are a multitude of guys who can catch the ball, from Lane to Stephen Gosnell to Benji Gosnell to Daquan Wright. You even go a little bit farther down the list. I'm interested to see some freshmen, some redshirt or true freshmen might get a little run at a wide receiver this week. One guy I'm interested to see, I don't know if he'll play, but number 5, Xavier Turner Bradshaw. He's the son of Ahmad Bradshaw. He has not played yet this season. He's a redshirt freshman, but he's a very, very shifty guy, very, very quick. I think if Jalen Lane for some reason cannot go, I think you'll see him get his first reps of the season. I'm very interested to see what he can do. There's a lot of young guys in that room that are unproven, but that's below a layer of Daquan Felton, Stephen Gosnell, a couple different guys who have been there before. Even DeJuan Lofton, he's a guy who kind of got buried on the depth chart a little bit. He was Tech's second leading wide receiver last year. He's a guy who I think you'll see a lot of on Saturday.
Mod Bradshaw's got to bring good memories to you, Richie, as a Giants fan. The longer you follow these sports, the older you feel, because like it feels like he just stopped playing fantasy football like 5 years ago, and he's already got a kid playing college football. Man, switching over to the defensive side of the ball, you guys are pretty stout defensively. You're close to the top of the FBS in sacks. You're pretty good against the pass. Just talk about your defense at a high level, what you guys do well, what you guys struggle with.
I think the biggest thing is last year Tech really struggled to pass rush. And one of the big things is Tech went and got Antoine Powell-Ryland from Florida out of the transfer portal. He has been fantastic so far this season. He already has 4 tackles for loss. He had 2 sacks, I believe, in the season opener. Tech's getting in the backfield more. The biggest problem for Tech right now is Tech has struggled to stop the run, which I know Rutgers has been able to run the ball fairly well so far in the first couple of weeks. So that's a positive sign for Rutgers. Tech did better against Purdue in the run game. Tech was horrendous against Old Dominion in terms of stopping the run, but I think a lot of it was because Old Dominion likes to spread everybody out and kind of go 4 wide receiver set and then just do a little outside zone and just trying to draw people out of the box. But Tech's DBs are very solid. My biggest question is Nasir Peoples. He did not play last week. He's a veteran safety. If Peoples for some reason cannot go, which I have no reason to believe he would considering he did not play last week, Tech has essentially Jalen Jones, who's a junior, but he moved over from wide receiver to safety in the offseason, and Mose Phillips, a true freshman, are the next 2 options there at safety. Tech can move Mansour Delane or Derek Canteen, 2 of the really, really good cornerbacks, over to safety. And we saw Tech do that a little bit against Purdue, where Tech's trio of cornerbacks, Dorian Strong, Mansour Delane, and Derek Canteen, are all really stout. That's probably the biggest strength of this defense is Tech got 3 really good corners. One of the other things, though, is after those 3 guys, it kind of drops off in experience, and you've got a bunch of freshmen that have never really played before. So, again, the depth a little bit is thin. The starters are really talented defensively. At linebacker, Tech's okay. My biggest thing is if Tech can get after the quarterback, and Antoine Powell-Ryland and C.J. McCray and Cole Nelson, the 3 defensive ends, they've done a good job of that so far. Keyshawn Burgos, another defensive end. Tech's been good getting after the quarterback. The real struggles have been in the run game. Brent Pry spoke a lot last week and yesterday about just fitting, getting the run fits down with the linebackers. Tech did a much better job of that against Purdue. I'm interested to see, I know this is a Rutgers offense that can be a little hit or miss sometimes. I'm kind of interested to see where Tech decides to come out and attack.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about the rushing defense. Is it more of just an interior issue on the defensive line? Is it more like lack of tackling from guys? Is it a linebacker issue?
I would say it's been linebackers. The defensive linemen have been good. They've graded out well. They've at defensive tackle, Virginia Tech essentially has 3 guys that have been here for 4 years. Norrell Pollard, Josh Fuga, Mario Kendricks are the 3 defensive tackles that have been in the program for 4 or 5 years now. They're all veteran guys. Tech's been good up front. It's really the linebackers, and it doesn't help when Keontae Jenkins, Tech's star linebacker, Sam or Whip, if that's what you want to call him, he went down with an injury last game, and Caleb Woodson, a true freshman, was thrust into the game. So again, another position where Tech is very, very thin. The linebacker is my biggest question, because I think the cornerbacks will be pretty solid, even though even though Tech is a little bit young at safety. Those guys have played okay in the first couple games. Defensive line has been good, but the linebackers have been a problem against the run. They've just kind of been maybe not where they're supposed to be. I guess that's what Brent Pry means when he talks about, not being in the right fits. Kelly Lawson, he's the Tech's will linebacker. He was named AC Player of the Week last week. He had 14 tackles. He played pretty well. At Mike, Alan Tisdale is now the starter. He's a guy who's been around since 2018. He's a really, really old guy. We actually spoke with him yesterday in yesterday's press conference. He's a very mature guy. Tech's kind of mixing and matching with linebackers and still trying to figure out what the best mix is. And as a result, you're going to end up playing some guys, I think, in some spots maybe that they're not necessarily 100% comfortable in, and there might be a little bit of miscommunication. So, when you're rolling out two different Mike linebackers, I guess is the best example, two guys who are communicating maybe a little bit differently, I think that might lead to some consistency issues. So Tech's biggest thing against the run has just been the linebackers. Everywhere else has been pretty solid. Purdue, I have the Purdue stats up. Purdue did well through the passing game. Obviously, that's a pretty big passing attack. Hudson Card threw for 250 yards. But the real killer was Devin Mockavy ran for 100 yards on the ground. And I think the problem for Tech's defense is that there were just times where, I don't want to say there was a big tackling issue, but times where guys were just a little bit out of position and they should have been there to make a tackle and they weren't.
Yeah, I think that spells bad news for Virginia Tech, because Rutgers is legitimately probably 5 deep at running back this year. Or the star running back Sam Brown is coming off a foot injury, but he got his first run in the season last year. Kyle Monungai is the third string back, and he rushed for 165 yards last week against Temple.
Yeah, he seems like he's pretty good.
He is very underrated. I think in terms of our fan base, they're starting to really start to love him as the fan favorite, because he consistently does all the dirty work well. Like there was one of those, like, those offensive linemen who are now tape grinders on Twitter are now like putting up, look at this block here. He had a total decleater in pass protection against Northwestern, their linebacker out of free blitzer. He just perfect form, just throws him right into the air. He touched the sky for a second and he got thrown on his back. But He consistently makes guys miss in terms of the first defender. He had this one really nice catch where he catches the ball in the flat, dead to rights. The linebacker has good form on him. He was able to spin away from that and go for like about 20 yards on a pass. He's just the kind of guy that's really easy to root for, I guess I'll say. Last year, when there was injuries in the running back room, he had like a 160-yard game against Michigan State as well. So the running back room is probably the deepest part of the offense in general for Rutgers. In terms of special teams for you guys, how is your special teams units in terms of kickoffs, punt returns, punter, kicker? Where would you say your strengths and weaknesses lie on special teams?
I think special teams have been pretty good this year. I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's necessarily Beamer ball quality, as it used to be.
It's got to be weird not to have elite special teams as a Tech fan. Yeah, not saying you guys aren't, but
Kyle Lowe is Tech's kickoff specialist. Most of his, I don't know if he had a single kick last week that didn't go for a touchback. He's pretty good in that area. Tech's kicker John Love has been pretty solid so far this season. I believe perfect on extra points and field goals. Tech's punter Peter Moore earned AC Player of the Week. He's a very good punter. So kicking wise, Tech's been pretty good. My biggest question is at punt return. Tech has two guys, Jalen Lane and then Tucker Holloway. He's one of the other wide receivers who I guess I just completely forgot to mention. He's a guy who we have not seen get a ton of run at wide receiver. I'm interested to see if that happens. But he was a really, really solid punt returner in a couple weeks span for Virginia Tech last year when he was kind of just thrust into that role as a true freshman, and he housed one against Georgia Tech. He had more punt return yards in that game than any other Virginia Tech player in a single game in history. And that was him as a true freshman.
Wow.
He and Jalen Lane, who came from Middle Tennessee State and had a fantastic career as a punt returner, they've been splitting time there. I'm interested to see if Tech just picks one to go with, because last week there were some miscommunication issues where there was one or two punts where Tech put out both Lane and Holloway back deep to return. Jeez. And there was one punt where they both just stared at the ball and there was no communication as the ball bounced in between the two of them and probably rolled another about 15, 20 yards. So that's something you can't have, and that's something I'm sure Tech will try to clean up this week. Otherwise, Tech's been good, pretty solid at special teams. Bashaw Tootin, one of the running backs, and Malachi Thomas, I guess the other running back. They've been returning kickoffs, and they've been pretty solid in that regard. So nothing about special teams stands out to me outside of the punt returns, which I think is the biggest question. But Tucker Holloway and Jalen Lane both shown in the past that they can do some damage, when I guess there's not communication issues.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Beischel. I know we kind of we just glanced over him because I want to talk about him because he's a Jersey guy and he's a preferred was a preferred walk-on, I should say.
Yeah, well, he transferred in this year from North Carolina A&T, so he spent a couple years. He spent a couple years at the FCS level and was really dominant, and then he transferred to Virginia Tech.
Gotcha. What just kind of tell me about what stands out about him as a running back? I know he wasn't the most highly recruited out of high school, obviously.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me figure out. I'm trying to remember where exactly he's from in Jersey.
It's
Paulsboro, just South Jersey.
Yeah. He's first of all, he's an awesome guy. Having an opportunity to chat with him, he's a very down to earth guy. Very quiet, but 5'11", 205. He's kind of built like a tank. He's very short, but he makes guys miss. He forced 10 missed tackles in that opener against Old Dominion. When he has a hole, when he has an opportunity, he'll take advantage of it. The problem is Tech's offensive line has been so bad that he has not been able to take advantage of it. But he's been good out of the pass game too. He had a 30-yard touchdown reception against Purdue, a little swing pass out of the backfield that he beat a couple defenders and took to the house. So he's a guy who has really been really strong for Virginia Tech out of the backfield. If Tech could run the ball better, he'd be even more effective. A lot of that is on the offensive line because Tootin is a very strong back and he's healthy. Malachi Thomas is Tech's second back. He's been good. He's a redshirt sophomore. This is his third season in Blacksburg. That's a pretty solid 1-2 punch Virginia Tech has there. The real problem has been the offensive line. The fact that there are no openings, there are no holes. And this is where I circle back to the Kyron Drones, Grant Wells discussion. I think Kyron Drones, it's hard because Virginia Tech fans have not had the opportunity to see what Kyron Drones can do simply because he has barely played against Old Dominion and Purdue. But we've seen the athleticism that he has, at least in bursts. And I think he could potentially be the quarterback moving forward simply because he has more ability in the run game and he will make teams defend the run. Now, the problem is you can't, you've got two good running backs. And if you've got a quarterback that can run, well, you can't just run the ball every single time. You have to be able to do both. And I think that is the biggest question I have going into this game is can Virginia Tech find some sort of consistent balance between running and passing the ball that works? And it hasn't worked so far in the first 2 weeks of the season. There's nothing that leads me to believe that it'll work against Rutgers, which is why I'm a little pessimistic. But to your question about the two running backs, Bashaw, he's very, very talented. And I like how Virginia Tech uses him and Malachi Thomas in the pass game because they're two shifty guys that will really make guys miss, and Tootin put that on display against Purdue.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm just trying to find connections between the two teams, and it's like the lone one between that and apparently Pat Flaherty and Ron Crook. Crook. Both
Crook.
coached David Deal. Crook had him in college, and Pat Flaherty had him in NFL. That's
How
only
about
two I
Tyrone
can
Powell,
find.
the
Oh,
linebacker?
yeah, you're right.
He was
Yeah.
committed to Virginia
Oh,
Tech.
man. Yeah, he was committed to Virginia Tech until Greg Schiano showed up with a helicopter out of school.
Yeah. And he's been an absolute
Nice
stud,
flex.
not to rub anything in, but he's arguably, he's one of our top players on the team in general.
Yeah.
He's basically a prototypical NFL linebacker in terms of size. He's starting to now finally put that production on the field. But our linebacker, Tyrone Powell has been a revelation this past 2 seasons for sure.
Yeah,
So you said that you were a little pessimistic heading this game. Las Vegas seems to agree with you. This line opened up at around -3, -3.5. Rutgers favored. It quickly jumped on, I want to say Tuesday. We were recording the pod and it was at -4.5. And then by the time we finished the pod, it was already at -6.5. So I don't know if that's injury news that's kind of leaking out. Usually QB changes will make that jump. Warren Sharp usually says the 2 main things that usually make a line move are either quarterback injuries or cluster injuries. So a lot of injuries at the same position. I think you guys are dealing with both of those. So that might explain why the line is moved. Let's get into predictions. So you're the guest. We'll give you the first crack at predictions. How do you see this game going? Let's get a score prediction for you if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think it's going to be it's going to be a rock fight. I don't think it's going to be a pretty football game. Now, it'll be prettier than the Russell Athletic Bowl, but that's a low bar.
Well, we got our fingers crossed because I don't think anybody wants to see that replayed.
No.
Yeah, I think Rutgers will have success on the ground, and I think that's going to be the defining factor. I'm very interested to see how Rutgers' aerial attack does because Virginia Tech has been pretty good in that regard. But I don't think it'll really matter if Rutgers can run the ball consistently, which Rutgers has, and Tech has not been able to defend it well consistently. I think that'll be the defining point in the game. I think defensively, I think the Scarlet Knights are going to be really tough, mostly because Virginia Tech has not been able to figure out the run game. I mean, this kind of seems to me like a strength on weakness kind of game where, I think Tech will hang around. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any means, but I do think it'll kind of come. I think it'll be closer than people think for a little bit of the game, but I do think Rutgers will pull away. I will say Rutgers 23-10.
Yeah, no, I'll go next. I agree that it's not going to look good. I mean, every game Rutgers has played this year so far has been like a weirdly low scoring to start, and then you kind of break away late, like basically an erosion of wearing the other team down. I think it'll be the same this week. Rutgers has had such anytime you hear backup quarterbacks can be starting and they're mobile, all Rutgers fans internally will die a little because we've had so much bad luck over the years against backup quarterbacks and also against mobile quarterbacks. But I do think that Rutgers matches up very well with Virginia Tech, like you alluded to. I don't see this as a game that's going to have a ton of scoring. I don't see the over getting smashed, but I think Rutgers will win. I love your guess too, so I can't make that exact guess. I'll go 24. I'll go 24-13. Rutgers wins.
Damn, dude, almost took my prediction. Let's talk about how Russell Athletic was a sponsor. Where the hell did are they even around anymore?
Probably not.
That's like Russell Athletic, like of all brands, like that's the one that got the bowl game.
Remember when they were like the only team that was sponsored by them as an apparel deal? I think it was Boston College for a while.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that game featured 70 yards of rushing total.
Gosh.
Let's not repeat that.
No, yeah, 13-10 in overtime. Just a really bad, just a bad game.
God.
Yeah, not a good one. But anyway, I don't know. This game's going to be weird. I think Rutgers has the better defense. I think Rutgers might have the better offense too at this point. I do think Virginia Tech's defense is going to give them their best test of the year because Northwestern and Temple just flat out stink. There's no question about it. And Rutgers took advantage of that and ran the ball up the gut for 160 yards with one player last week. And then week before, I think someone was close to, or they had 150 total between two guys, something like that. But either way, I think they're going to just stick to the game plan. They're going to try to control the tempo. And they're probably going to win this game, I would say, I want to say 24-10. I wanted to say 24-13, but you took my pick. And I do think I was looking at their kicker, and their kicker is actually pretty solid. I know he's only been playing for 2 years, it looks like, but the only one he missed was like a 50-plus yarder.
Yeah, so he's good.
Yeah, so I would say 24-10 is probably the most likely scenario, and everyone's going to get really hyped because Rutgers only gave up one touchdown again.
Yep. All right, David, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us where we can find your work and where you can find you on social media.
Yeah, I am on social media at the real D Cunningham on Twitter and Instagram. And you can follow us at techsideline.com. We're on social media at techsideline. I'm one of 4 full-time guys that we put out Virginia Tech stuff every week. I will be in Piscataway with Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. We'll be up there. We'll have a full crew of people. I'm really excited to make the trek up. I think it's going to be a fun environment, assuming the weather holds off from this hurricane that is
it
off
looks
the
like
coast.
It's going to, from what I've seen, thankfully.
Yeah. I after last week, I can deal without rain for a little bit longer. But no, yeah, techsideline.com. Again, we're recording this at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. Later this afternoon, we'll have football coverage from practice, and we'll find out more on what Virginia Tech guys are playing and what aren't. And I'm very interested to see what happens on Saturday. I think it'll be kind of a stalemate. I don't know if anybody ever would have thought, going back to the Big East days, that we'd all be picking Rutgers to win by 10 to 13 points against Virginia Tech. But here we are, man.
I was listening to your guys' pod. You guys do a great job, by the way. If Rutgers fans want to get more intel on Virginia Tech in general, Tech Sidelines podcast is a great listen. I'm sure you guys will have a couple podcasts out this week. You guys were going over the history, and Rutgers has not been a favorite in this series since 1992. So I think 14 straight games, Rutgers has been an underdog. And it sounds like you guys have a pretty big group coming up to Piscataway as well. Like almost 500 people coming up as a contingent, if I'm remembering correctly.
There'll be Tech fans will travel well. There'll be a bunch of Tech fans up there. Specifically our media group. There'll be 4 of us, and then there'll be a bunch of Tech student media that'll travel too. So they'll be up there. So it'll be a good group. I've never been to Rutgers. I will probably be back in December because Virginia Tech women's basketball plays at Rutgers in December. That's what Jersey Mike's Arena now.
Yep.
Big switch up.
Yeah. So I'll probably be back in December, but yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be a fun Saturday. I'm kind of excited and interested to see where it goes because I know this is kind of like this is a big game for Rutgers as far as like you win this and you're 3-0. If you're Virginia Tech, this is one where you need a game like the Hokies need. So this is kind of big time. I don't want to say big time stakes, but these are kind of big time stakes for both teams in terms of their mentalities moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, Rutgers has a very narrow path to a bowl this year. Just, you're playing Iowa on the road, Wisconsin on the road, and you're playing Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. That's 5-year games right there. So not many winnable games on the schedule, or at least, when you're looking at it at the start of the season, and this is definitely one of them. So, and it's just as big as a game for Virginia Tech. It's kind of like where are we at as a program right now in year 2 under Brent Pry. So both teams that have a lot of incentive to win. And I don't know what your guys' path to a bowl game looks like this year, but I'm sure this is an important game in that path.
Yeah, well, so Tech has Marshall next week on the road. Marshall's no pushover. I mean, this is a team that won 9 or 10 games last year, and This is a game, Tech schedule. This is not, I don't want to say Tech schedule is the most difficult, but after Marshall is Pitt, then a trip down to Florida State. This is not necessarily going to be a super easy schedule. If Virginia Tech wants any chance of making a bowl game, you gotta get a win in the non-conference, and it starts this week. And so I think this game, as far as Virginia Tech fans are concerned, to put it in perspective for Rutgers, this is a game Virginia Tech probably needs to win to go to a bowl game this year. And you lose this, Tech has Wake Forest and Syracuse and Boston College and Virginia later this year, but those aren't necessarily guaranteed wins either. Those are games, Boston College and Virginia Tech Boston College and Virginia are games that the Hokies should win, but you got to take care of business when you have the opportunity. And I'm very interested to see how it plays out.
Is Boston College home or away for Virginia Tech?
Boston College is on the road, which nobody ever plays well up in Chestnut Hill. So again,
because they cheat. They use the headsets. You saw that? Holy Cross head coach came out yesterday in his press conference, and he said he's like, lightning storm. Our headsets didn't work for the first 2 quarters for some reason, and theirs did, and it's like weird. And I'm just a bunch of cheaters. Just saying they can't even cheating versus Holy Cross. So I mean, I think you guys will be fine.
They barely beat Holy Cross too.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, they're not good. The problem is every time Virginia Tech goes up there, Tech does not play well. But yeah, again, seems like it's a pretty big week for both Virginia Tech and Rutgers.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, David, really appreciate your time. We kind of hit the high end of where we told you we would be today. But everybody else, thank you for listening once again. This has been another edition of the Night Report podcast. Signing off.